Episode number 2 of the Fireside Football Chat off-season podcast, just to keep going in the space, reconnect with people. And today it's basically catching up with Sharpe Clarke. You and I, we go back a few years when we started on a particular show that I was invited to that you were on. And this is really going to be part journey, part perspective, part process related, handicapping, your evolution. Because really, the time I've known you is a very short period of time compared to old guys like me, 40 years and stuff, doing this stuff. I really like to hear what's going on now in the spaces of football. So how are you, first of all?
I'm good. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a weird time of year when you've been grinding, every week for the whole NFL season, and then everything just stops. So I've been getting into more of my other work recently, which is nice, but it is weird to not be constantly, watching film and looking at the market and all that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit because your days must be consumed, in the middle of the NFL season. It's just NFL, right? Not college football.
Right. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So, one would think on the one hand, if you're trying to do like I am, 130 some college teams and 32 NFL teams, that'd be crazy. And maybe 32 NFL teams is easier, but everybody's approach is different. And it's really 24/7 if you're trying to get this right.
Yeah, exactly. 24/7, but only maybe 5 months out of the year.
Yeah, depending on when you start and whatever. For me, the bell goes off. The fireworks on July 4th, that signals get stuff going, start the college process.
Yeah.
And we'll get into a little bit, but there is downtime in the NFL. Like you said, May 15th to August 15th is complete downtime for me in the NFL.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your journey. How did this start for you?
Yeah, I mean, I was into fantasy football and watching football, and then sort of wanted to, I'm a very, very competitive person. So I just wanted to maximize every edge I had over my league mates. And so I started watching all the film and taking notes on it. And it became at the same time, like COVID hit and legalization of sports betting happened. And so it kind of like coalesced into this, like, well, I wonder if I can bet my opinions, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then I was really successful that first year, which I think is sort of the variance that prompted me to keep going, right? Like if you do it for a year and you don't do well that first year, then you just kind of get discouraged. So I got kind of that boost and it just became something that I was really, really passionate about. So.
I should defer now. Neither one of us is wearing a hat for this episode. So when I first met you in the space, which is probably about 3.5 years ago, I think it was with Sportfolio Kings. I was on for a couple of episodes. You may have been on a weekly basis and stuff. And something just clicked in terms of your analysis at that particular time that I wanted to have some more interaction with you. So what was that like at that point in your career, let's say 3.5 years ago? Where were you on the journey? How much of the process had you been able to implement?
Yeah, I mean, it's always ongoing. So, the first year it was just the concept of I'm going to watch every game and I'm going to take notes on every game. That was like 2019. And then it became in 2020 a way to quantify it. Like, how do I translate what I'm seeing on film into numbers? Because once you have numbers, it's easier to remove the biases and things, or like the misremembering. Like our brains will just retranslate everything all the time, and so it solidifies my evaluations into a system that I could sort of match up future matchups based on how I thought they performed in prior matchups. I could identify maybe where results and people's discussions of teams didn't line up with what exactly I saw on the field. That was kind of the initial thing. And then every offseason I improved the system and sort of built programs around it, models around it, focused on different elements of play that I found to be particularly not only predictive, but also maybe overlooked by the market or not quantified correctly by the market generally. And so as I identified what those things were and identified patterns, I'm a very pattern-minded person. I started to build that into my model. So every offseason I've revisited and sort of worked on my model to refine it and make it better at making predictions so that I can, continue to grow. The process is always evolving. The moment you stop and say, my process is done, that's when you're down as a better.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started this way back in the day and originated my own power ratings and theories and whatever, I did back testing first. I took 3 years of data at the very end of the 70s, start of the 1980s, and back tested all the power ratings, how I would do this and that until I was ready to go. Did you do any back testing, or did you, how did you arrive at that point, and it's probably fleshed out since then, at the basis for how you were going to attack week by week?
Yeah, one of the reasons why I wasn't able to build a model from the outset is because all the data that I use is created from my film watching. And so I didn't have a database of data to backtest, basically. So so every off season since I started, I've actually gone back and graded a whole season's worth of past football using my systems so that I have more data, right? So now I have 5 years of data of my evaluations, my grades, my statistics. So now I actually do back tests, and I do have actual models that spit out numbers, whereas it was much more informal when I first got going because I just didn't have the data to back it up.
And so in terms of power ratings or setting your own line, do you do that in terms of, does your model do that for you? Do power ratings do that for you?
Yeah, my model does that for me, and I don't have sort of you know contextless numbers on every team. I don't say like this is a +3, this is a -3. Everything in my model is sort of interactive, right? So like the things that make a team good, or the ways that one team is good, matching up against the way another team is bad, it might have a stronger impact, than it would in another matchup. So I don't have abstract ratings, I have matchup ratings. So I can plug in two teams, who's home, who's away, is a neutral. And my model will test those interactions for those two specific teams and come up with a number that I think is fair. And so it might be like, I might have three teams that if you look at the individual predictions for those three games, it wouldn't necessarily be a linear difference between the three teams.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, I'm so happy to hear that from this new generation of handicappers, that it's not just power ratings, even though I originate that, but matchup analysis is so important. Team A may not be able to force Team B to abandon the run, but Team A, when they play Team C, is going to make them pass centric or something like that, and then you can see different different permutations of what's going on. And I think that's an important point, an important handicapping point. And I like the fact that you have that in your analysis.
Yeah, I think it's important, especially in a game like football where there's several matchups on every play, right? It's not as simple as this team is better. It's who's winning this left tackle matchup, who's winning on the outside. Is wide receiver 2 going to be getting open against CB2? Are they going to have to double team him? And there's so many different matchups in a game that determine how our team performs, that I think it's important to incorporate that into any respected model.
So how much is hand done and how much is computer driven? I mean, how long does it take you to get ready for any particular game on the schedule?
Yeah, so it's all both. So I watch every game and grade every game manually.
Do you sleep?
Yeah, I do occasionally sleep on after Tuesday. So the grading is manual. My data that I pull is manual because I'm watching. And then from there, most of the sort of back end prediction stuff is computerized, and so it's based on my database of data that I've created, and then what I'm grading the teams as. And then I like to do some market analysis. I like to do some subjective. There's always injury analysis that you kind of have to do manually. Like there's all these layers that you have to put on it in terms of, do I make a bet? How confident am I? What's the market doing? But the basis of my system is manual grading turning into automated number making. Yeah.
Okay. So when there's bye weeks for teams, you probably stand up and cheer because that's 3 fewer games.
Yeah. I don't know what to do with myself when week 18 finishes and I'm like, okay, so some of these games I don't even need to watch.
Yeah, that's true. So are you still as diligent or even more diligent in terms of watching every play of every game, or how do you break that down?
Yeah, I watch my grading I do on the quick replays, so it's like just the plays, 40 minutes or whatever, and then there are games that I will then sort of dive into in terms of like all 22, just because there's something I'm not quite capturing. I had unexpected results or like outlier results, like what's happening, and so it's sort of like driven by curiosity and questions in terms of, do I need to probe further? But my basic rating is just watching the film, like the basic film.
So questions are always popping into my head. So I'm thinking the game's 30-7 in the fourth quarter, and Aaron Rodgers has the 7. And then he's got 100, he passes 150 yards in the fourth quarter or whatever. How do you grade those fourth quarter meaningless stats compared to if those yards had been achieved in the first or second quarter?
I'm typically not grading those. I'm not even watching those. Like if it's 30-7 in the fourth quarter and there's not much time left, like I turn the game off because it's a waste of time. Like you're not learning anything meaningful about either team. So I don't actually have any statistics from those periods. And I actually have a scaling system that sort of it starts to scale down when the game gets to be somewhat decided. And then it scales down to 0 at a certain point. So
okay, good to hear. Yeah. A lot of us do various ways on how we network. Maybe we consume mainstream media or not so mainstream media, or you have a circle of people that you correspond with. Where is your networking take you? From the beginning, did you network to get going? Did you do this all on your own? And where is your networking? How has it evolved over the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, it's been very organic. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I got started. I just was enjoying betting, and I enjoy arguing with people on the internet, like it's about things that I care about, right? Like if I've watched every snap of every game and some nobody is telling me, so and so sucks, I'm just like, like I love sharing my my opinions with those people, and also learning like the other way, right? Like sometimes someone else will point something out and I'll be like, man, they were right about that. Like I got kind of ahead of myself, or I misinterpreted this, right? So I love that process. And then that kind of became, going public, I guess, with my opinions. And then that turned into like getting recruited by 4for4 and joining them to do their spread and total betting on their site. And so that kind of broadened my networking and opportunities and visibility. And then once I had that visibility, I got sort of reached out to by a larger betting group that wanted, was interested in having my information exclusively. So now I work with them.
Okay. And that just happened, last few months or so?
It actually happened during the 2023 season. When they reached out. And so towards the end of that season, I was kind of like, I was still doing 4for4, but they were like, 4for4 subscribers, right, using my bets. And then it went really well. So this 2024 season, I just worked exclusively with them, not publicly.
So let's talk a little bit about the 4for4 group. How did that come about? And further on the networking aspect, is this something that you were able to learn stuff from one another, or were you kind of more independent? You were set, you knew what you wanted to do, and where was that? How much give and take in terms of it? How did it help you?
Yeah, I mean, I was very independent. They were the guys that I work with, Connor Allen and Ryan Noonan. They're really good props bettors, NFL props bettors, but they didn't have a successful sides or totals model, right? So my work was somewhat independent in terms of coming up with my bets, doing my analysis. It was I think the benefit was just the community, right? There's a Discord, you talk to other people that are betting, and it's just sort of a fun time where you're all sharing your opinions and stuff. So the process didn't really change in terms of actually making my bets. It was just a platform to share my opinions, and I would do write-ups in every game. I would talk about what I'm seeing on the field that people found interesting. People could ask me questions, and that stimulated more thought and more process. So I don't think there was much in terms of like collaborating on my bets. It was more so just a community to where I could share what I'm independently coming up with.
Is there a point in time when you're on the fence of a play where you might reach out, or you may see even a opinion that pushes you your way because you don't respect somebody else and they're on the other side. Are there on the fence kinds of situations that you have?
Not specifically in terms of like so and so likes this bet or so and so doesn't like this bet, but to the extent that that is impacting the market, it can, right? So like, I might make a number, and I'm sort of like aware that I might be on an unpopular team in a game. Like I may not be rushing to bet it, and so when the market moves in certain directions at certain times, like I understand which books take which limits, and so there's sort of like bets that I might respect more than other bets and might cause me to kind of go slower versus like, okay, I'm fine with that movement. I'm going to fade it, go against it like that. So it's more, I'm more doing it independently by viewing the market rather than sort of listening to anyone in particular.
Right.
In that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're like me and you have your power ratings or whatever, you're not really going to veer from the power ratings. Although if you're 1 point off, I mean, for me, it's not an exact science. None of this is an exact science.
Right.
The ball is not perfectly aligned and so on and so forth. You didn't know what everybody had for breakfast that morning, how they're feeling. So
Yeah.
that's why nobody's a 75% handicapper. They're all doing the various things.
Yeah.
But the brainstorming, for example, for me, when Chris and I are brainstorming, we, and he says something about a team or a concept or whatever, or I say something, it's not so much who the other person is on. It's just, oh, I didn't think of that kind of particular thing. Are you getting that from the industry at all?
Not a lot. I think what's more common is when I hear something and I understand why they're wrong about it. Like popular talking points or something. Like they might have like collected a few outcomes and like made a conclusion about it based on these outcomes, but like because I understand the details of every play that went into every one of those outcomes, I might be thinking, okay, they're coming to an incorrect conclusion based on, looking at the wrong thing, right? There's a million ways you can look at a football game. And so when, for example, like someone might say, oh, this quarterback struggles against the zone and is like really good against man. And so then they like overplay that angle, because, oh, they're playing a zone team. And so we should bet on this quarterback. But then you like break it down and be like, well, yeah, the teams that played zone against them were the like top 5 defenses or that played man against them, the top 5 defenses in the league. Of course, they're going to struggle against man defenses. The zone defenses they played are the worst defenses in the league. So it's like, you can't just take abstractly these pieces of information and draw conclusions. Right. So sometimes when I see those and I know they're wrong, it gives me a bit more confidence to be like, okay, like this is a market influencing opinion that I'm going to sort of battle against and I'm comfortable with that. So I'd say that's more common.
When you're watching every snap or most every snap of every game and so on, to the common person out there, it's so easy to that recency factor, that overreaction. And I think that's one of the flaws in handicappers in general. They saw what they saw. It was a televised game and so on, and they're overreacting to that one game. How do you guard against that? Because you're watching so much and you're consuming all this. I think it's so important to guard against that.
Yeah, I think the question is, how do you extracting the signal from the recent results without overreacting to the recent results? Because you don't want to ignore them because that game happened, right? Like things happened on the field that matter. And so my model has a scaling factor for, how much each game matters and recency and, were there injuries that impacted that outcome? Were there specific matchup things? There's so many things that go into a game that I just try to understand, like, this surprising result was the result of X, Y, and Z, right? And so like sometimes the answer is going to be like, we don't need to change this much. This is not a big impacting game, and so I might like downscale the impact of one specific result, or it might be that like this is a real red flag. Like this is something that has been sort of bubbling up and like really came out in this one game, and so there's not really a concrete way to just be like, this is how much I value it, and I stick to that, because if you're not dynamic, if you're not responding to the dynamics of the game, then I think you're missing something. So it's very situational. It's very game by game, team by team. But I think being aware of that and just not giving into, recency bias is really important. I just don't have a solid answer of exactly how to do it.
So 2024, you leave you do the betting market, you kind of if I remember correctly on Twitter, you were going to be less active there and you were going to be more concentrate on stepping up your game, is how I would say it, maximizing your own opportunities, seeing where you fit in. I think you were even talking about bet sizing was going to increase and so on.
Yeah.
So how did that go? Walk me through what your weekly routine was then. I mean, in some ways you're saving time because you're not on the air, you're not doing space, but are you doing something differently in 2024 besides making a higher level bet?
Yeah, I mean, I do have more time generally because I'm not doing write-ups for every game. That makes a huge difference. I can be more nimble. I can be more agile. My bet volume increases because, whereas before, when you're giving out plays publicly, you can't just give out, oh, this one number on this one book, right? You have to give out a play that's available at the same price across the market, right? So there's a lot more situations where I might say, let's take this, off market price on this one book, just because I think there's a little bit of value there. So there's a lot more sort of trading and betting and less sort of talking about betting, right? I mean, that's kind of the journey I think every serious bettor makes, is kind of like when you get to the scale where you kind of have to shut up and just start betting. It's like, do you keep talking and keep your bets small, or do you scale up? And that's kind of what I chose to do. And it's a riskier path and involves more ups and downs, but I think it's very rewarding, especially when it goes well.
So week 1, 2, 3, you have your initial data and so on. What's the volume of plays that you're talking about? Are we talking about just straight plays and totals? Are we talking about in-game? Are we talking about quarter plays? How many things do you have going? I mean, some people are content to have 2 or 3 plays a week, but they put a lot into it. But and some people want to have 10, 12 things going, teasers, parlays.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a high volume, like I bet on a lot of games, a lot of sides and totals, more than most people. I mean, I think honestly, like with how much the market moves from open to close, if you're willing to bet at any time in the week, like you should probably have bets on most games. If a game opens -3 and closes -5, it's like, did you like -3 or did you like +5? Because one of those is probably a decent bet, right? Maybe marginally, maybe it's like right in the middle, and both of them are sort of marginal value. But like, if you have a number that you feel confident about and the market is moving, a lot of times you'll find a time when you have a bet that you like. And when you look at 16 games, that's 32 possible bets on sides and totals. Like, I'll probably bet I don't know, anywhere from like 12 to 15 of them every week.
Okay. And any teasers, parlays, or anything like that?
Not really. The limits are smaller on those, and I think if you have like a -110 6-point teaser out, like hammer it to death, like great, but it's just sort of it's too easy, like anything that's too easy, I just don't really I don't really want there, right? So -120 is kind of marginal. Like I might play a couple of those teasers throughout the year when I feel really good about both legs of it, when it's it's 2.5 to 8.5 and stuff, but like it's just not my focus. My focus is on the main markets where limits go up as you approach kickoff.
With totals, and I must confess, I bet less money on totals and fewer totals because I don't have a model, or the power ratings don't necessarily, for me, predict totals. It's got to be something I see in the matchup that really goes at it and so on. How do you attack totals? How do you did you discover something where you feel you have an edge in terms of totals?
Yeah, I mean, my totals model isn't very good. I'll be honest. Like my spreads model is like pretty much I follow it, with very few exceptions. My totals model, it just wasn't like, I'm looking at the numbers it's producing, I'm looking at the market, and I'm just like, there's too many that are too far off, right? So I didn't really follow my model very strictly this year. It was more so identifying potential bets and then doing the analysis to be like, is there something in my is there something in this matchup or something in my data that suggests that this might be over underpriced? In addition to the model lean, then I would make a bet. But it's mostly just kind of like, what are people getting wrong about this game? Like what is the market? How is the market viewing this game, and what ways could it be wrong? And kind of betting that. That's my totals approach. But I want to improve the model to where I do bet it the same way that I bet my spreads.
I have some theories about totals, and I want to basically, in my handicapping, stick to what I feel I know the best, where I have an edge. So I'm not ever going to get too involved in totals. But I think part of it is the way the league wants to structure the games. Points are rising, penalties
Mhm.
are falling. Every year they emphasize one different type of penalty or another. We're going to call more holding. We're going to call more down the line of scrimmage. And I think it affects totals more than spreads. That's just my theory.
I agree. I agree. I think we saw some. I mean, the kickoff rule was huge. Like it just made a huge difference, especially in games with more points, right? So like higher totals.
Uh-huh.
Higher totals meant more scoring. More scoring meant more kickoffs. More kickoffs meant more of an impact on field position. And it's just it was cascading.
So let's talk CLV, because you mentioned a game goes to +3 for to +5. First of all, how do you know the model? You hope that you and I, if we're doing this right, we're going to be right more than wrong as to where the number is going to go. Otherwise, we're in big trouble because we're not getting the best of the line. But yeah, you had some theory when we were texting a little bit about why CLV was not working as much for people this year. So I give you the floor to talk about CLV.
Yeah, I mean, it was a wild year for CLV, at least for me. I don't know if you saw my tweet, but basically on bets that closed well this season, like moved in my favor after I bet it, I lost money. On bets that were neutral, where the number that I bet was like somewhat available towards the end, I made a little bit, and then bets that moved against me to where like I was just plain wrong versus the market, I made a massive amount of money. And I know that that's idiosyncratic and small sample size. A lot of that is variance, like you just outcomes are noisy. But over 5 years now of betting, I've actually have zero edge greater on bets that close well versus bets that close against me. There's no difference in my ROI over 5 years of betting high volume size and totals versus the close, right? And again, that's still not a massive sample size, but 5 years of betting on NFL is a decent amount of sample size. And it's caused me to sort of question the market, right? Like the way that I approach the way the market works is a little bit unique. And I think there are reasons to believe that the widely held view that basically the closing number dictates the median outcome of a game is not quite accurate. And I can get into that, but I think because of that, the question then becomes how do you in order to maximize your ROI, how do you identify the biases that are informing the market and how do you bet against those, right? Because it's no longer just about getting CLV. It's about identifying, okay, so like the market is going to close this way, but why? And if you can identify that, then I think you can kind of, for bets where you're on the market side, you bet early and get CLV. And then bets where you're not on the market side, you bet late and just take the price that's available at post. And I think if you do that, you're always getting the best of the number. It's just a question of when you bet. And I think that's sort of became a game within a game in the NFL where it's like identifying the market trends and trying to use those to leverage when you place your bets has been like a focus of mine over the last year. And in addition to just the regular handicapping that I'm doing.
Yeah, I have a personal problem with how people evaluate CLV, because to me, it's like I might have CLV because I bet a game on Tuesday and I have 5 points of value. But if you look at the closing line, I only have 2 points of value. So people are going to say, well, you didn't have as much value because of where the closing line is. And I say I had plenty of value because I bet it on Tuesday and that's my line. It's not closing line value. It's just line value. So I have a problem with the randomness a little bit with closing line value. Part of it could be injury driven or one service driven. And so I'm always open for discussion on that kind of topic, but I'm not crazy about it. Just like I'm not crazy about when we hear market splits. 80% of the public is on this and 60% of the bet of the money is on this. From where? From what? How do I know that? I'm skeptical there.
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting is like once you get to the top levels of betting, there's very few people at the top of the peak that are betting millions of dollars on game day on these spreads, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're betting smaller but you're sharp, you might influence the market through Thursday, and then eventually you've reached your cap. You've bet your $20,000 on the game, and you're not going to bet anymore because that's just what your bankroll permits you to bet.
Yeah.
on Sunday, someone with $200,000 bets is going to come in, and it doesn't matter what your market efficiency is a bit of a misnomer because the opinions in the market are not reflected equally. They are heavily favored towards the people who are betting the most and have been successful in the long run. The problem with that is there's some variance even in that, right? Over the course of an NFL season, two models that are both maybe like 3% ROI models might be betting all season, and due to variance, one of them just does better, right? And so now this model is going to receive more weight in the market because the people betting it have more money to bet it, right? And so like, there's a sort of self-affirming bias within the market where the winning models become the market-making models, and then they lose their edge because now they're betting against themselves, basically. And I think this is why we see top-level originators not last forever, is because eventually their numbers become the market-influencing numbers. And so I think there's sort of an element of like temporary being the top of the market and the cycle. And I think in that cycle, there's room for some market inefficiency, at close.
Yeah, I'm thinking, with the market and with everything, is that bookmakers are getting smarter too in some ways. I know that the art of the bookmaking has changed from the days because it's a business now and people move on air. If a Sharpe book moves a line a half a point or a point, then all these others follow regardless of how much money they're taking at their own book. So it's a different kind of business that way, but it's not the wild, wild west like it used to be when there wasn't this computer, where you could see what everybody else is betting. I was in Vegas when they would change the lines with an eraser.
Yeah.
And so you go across the street and you get the original line, you come back and you get another line that's 2 points different, and you were middling, and the wild, wild west days of bookies and stuff like that. There were different kind of edges. So it's a different kind of market efficiency now because you're not seeing as many differences. And when you bet during the week can matter. Are you armed and ready to go at openers?
Sometimes. It's such a fast market. Like now, I think people are acting Sunday night, and if you have the right outs, you can get down a decent amount on Sunday night and Monday morning. So I have to be ready. I mean, essentially, but it's sort of like I'm ready on maybe 4 or 5 of the games, and then so when I'm watching film, I'm prioritizing games that I anticipate I might have a bet on based on what the look ahead was, based on what I view the scheme as. And how I view the matchup. So yeah, I mean, I'm typically betting a couple games on Sunday night, Monday morning, and getting what I can. And sometimes that's a full fill, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it moves. But I think you have to be to capture some of that value.
Yeah, and I think I do kind of the same thing, especially for college, because you can catch numbers that shouldn't be there early. I'm flagging as I'm going through my numbers and getting ready for the week. I'm flagging 3 or 4 games because I can't be ready on everything personally. There's too much going on Sunday afternoon, Sunday night, Monday morning. But something catches my eye. There's a box score, for example. I don't know if you read the box scores, but there's a box score where that wrong team won because of the way that's going on. And what's that opener number? And I might make a note. If this number's this, I got to hit it right away. Yeah. So I'm only doing and same for the NFL. The NFL numbers for me, they last a little bit longer. College lasts not very long. So you're either ready or you're not. And I can only take 4 or 5 of those games and get ready for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think and it gets tougher every year, I think.
It does. And the market is pinching us, I think, and it's harder. And I feel bad for the people that are getting into it now, because it's a little bit harder, because if you win right away, you start getting limited. Might be another question for you there. Have you found with your uptick in volume that's happening to you, that certain books are saying, maybe we don't want your action anymore, especially your name starts with Sharpe?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I have to work with a network, is because the legal sports books that I bet on won't let me bet anymore. So, DraftKings is the worst. But they won't let me bet anything. But FanDuel, I can get something down at least. They're pretty fair. Like I have access to Circa in Colorado, which is really nice. But
Yeah.
the problem with Circa doesn't always have the best price that I want, right? So I need access to other outs. But yeah, I mean, if you win, the thing about it is like I only bet major NFL markets, so I like avoided props, I avoided betting stale lines to try to keep my accounts healthy. But
yeah,
they're sophisticated enough to recognize like, okay, this person's bets close well, even if they're major markets, or this person wins, so we're gonna cut our risk profile, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I understand. I usually can bet the most amount of money at the places that have the toughest lines.
Yeah.
So
I guess
there's that scale there. Let's talk preseason preparation then for NFL. You kind of put that. I can't put it aside now because I'm watching the combine. I'm looking at the draft from a lot of different perspectives. So does the draft at all matter to you in terms of what you're doing? And if it doesn't, how do you know where you need to be week 1 in the NFL?
Yeah, I ignore the entire offseason. I don't pay any attention to it. Like I know the free
That's
agents.
amazing. It's amazing to me, but yeah.
Everyone has such strong opinions on, oh, they overpaid for this guy, or like, this they gave up too much for this guy, and this draft pick was such a bad pick. And like, bottom line is we all don't know shit. Like we don't know shit. What we do know is the data that we have, right? So the data that I have is how the teams performed last year. And so what I do is I completely ignore the offseason. And then once we approach the season in August, I start by evaluating the prior year for every team, right? So I go through every team. I start with how they did last year. What were the factors that contributed to that? Did they overperform, underperform? Did they have cluster injuries on the offensive line? Where were they weak? What was their performance compared to their perception versus their record, et cetera? And then from there, I just evaluate the whole offseason in one go, right? I say, wow, this team really struggled at cornerback, and their defensive line was doing a good job, but because the receivers were always open so quickly, the defensive line never actually got to the quarterback, and they just signed a $30 million cornerback and drafted with the number 8 pick a cornerback, right? So I might say, okay, I'm anticipating this having an impact on this team. Very tentatively, right? Like I don't have a strong opinion. I have a projection that I kind of like write in pencil. And then I'm really spending the first 3 to 4 weeks of the next season of games evaluating, should I mark that in pen, or was I wrong about that? What else have I been wrong about? And so, for example, like last year I watched all the starting quarterbacks college film. That hour-long highlight tapes where they just kind of show the plays back to back to back to back, just to get a sense of who these players were. And I came away from that thinking, 1, Caleb Williams was amazing, and 2, Jaden Daniels could be a bust. 2 completely incorrect opinions, obviously, based on their rookie years. But here's the thing. I was fading Chicago in like week 2 or 3, like hard, because immediately I knew that I was wrong about Caleb Williams. Mm-hmm. And Washington was actually my highest ROI side that I bet all year. I bet on Washington constantly because I was wrong. like when you form opinions based on limited data and understanding that like you just don't know, you just don't hold those opinions that strongly. And so then you're willing to adapt and evolve. And I think that's the key to how I evaluate offseason changes and rookies is I don't know shit. I can make my predictions, but what matters is how those teams look coming into the next season and how those changes have been made.
Yeah, and I think that's a teaching point, how to pivot, when to pivot, be willing to pivot off your, the pencil opinions and stuff. And weeks 1 to 4, I actually do not use, like for 2024, I do not fully use 2024 data until 4 weeks have been played, because you need some sort of composite schedule where they played 4 teams, different styles and stuff like that, where you can see, wait a second, I've got to completely abandon 2023 data for 2024.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it depends on the team, of course. Some data is more meaningful than others. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because you have new coaches, new staffs, roster turnaround. You're going to have to pivot maybe a little bit more than a team that makes 2 changes in the season. Yeah. How much writing do you do before the season and during the season? Personal writing.
Yeah, I've stopped doing writing. Focusing only on betting. I mean, I have a a blog that I write every now and then that I one day might turn into a book. That's kind of the dream, but but that's more like betting philosophy, not so much and life philosophy, not so much
Yeah.
like team analysis. I used to do every team, every off season I would write about every team and put that content out there. But it's just one, as it became, my focus became betting and not content creation. It just seemed pointless. And two, the more unique your opinions, the more valuable they're going to be in the market. And so by not sharing all the things that I'm processing, I think that I can sort of retain a little bit more value versus the market. So,
yeah. So how do you track non-quarterback rookies? For example, when do you know that Cooper DeJean and Mitchell are actually immediate improvements for Philadelphia in the secondary versus what they had?
Yeah, I mean, over time, right? I mean, it's just sort of the Eagles defense started grading for me really elite. I can't remember the exact week. It might have been like 6 or so. And so to what extent that was the rookies, I mean, obviously some of it, Nakobe Dean, what was the linebacker? Forget his name. He was awesome. Like the defensive line was winning. I don't necessarily assign individuals credit. What I observe is that this defense is actually dominant. And so at that point, like they're grading well for me and they're impacting my projections for that team. So in that case, maybe 6 weeks, but it just depends on the team, like Rams, Jared Verse and those guys, maybe took like 8 weeks. So, and sometimes it takes them a while. Like you can't, like rookie progression is not linear, right? It's sometimes it clicks, and you can kind of see that in the charts, but yeah, I mean, it's just case by case, like observing how much of a difference they're making. And when things become unexpected, right? Like I'm 4 weeks in and I thought this was going to be a bottom 10 defense and they performed like a top 5 defense. What possible explanations are there? Did they change coordinators? Did they add players? Or is this just, like they're outplaying their talent, right? Like, and those have different answers in terms of how strongly you project it moving forward. So,
and sometimes you stick to for me, like I stuck to my opinion on Pittsburgh, even though they rambled through and overachieved in those first 7, 8, 9 weeks. But then you look at in the off season, when I do schedule analysis, weeks 11 to 18, we're going to be brutal. 6 games against their own division, playing San Francisco, playing Kansas City, playing whatever. They hadn't faced the meat. It was just a top loaded or bottom loaded early schedule. So it's managing these different factors team by team, I think.
Yeah. And like when your system is designed to evaluate play rather than results, I think you just have a better model. So like I remember
that's good.
During the season, I posted my power ratings at one point, sort of like, I know I said I don't have power ratings, but it's like sort of reverse engineered based on how matchups would go. And I posted my power ratings and Pittsburgh was 20th in my ratings and they were 8-2 at the time. Yeah. And I just got like ripped apart by all these Twitter randoms. Like, how can you possibly be taken seriously? Do you even watch the games? And it's like, yes, I've graded every single snap of every game. Like, and then sure enough, they like completely, I bet against them pretty much every week from that point on to the end of the year. And it was awesome.
Yeah. I don't think they ever rose above like 13th for me in terms of actual power numbers, even when they were that high. And then they were going to be underdogs the rest of the way because the schedule tilted up. I mean, I am a Mike Tomlin fan in terms of how he prepares his teams, but there are holes on that team, as we know. And then there are coaches and coaching changes. So we have 7 new coaches. We have 8 or 9 new coordinators. This league is a what have you done lately league. Are you evaluating coaches at all before September 1st?
So coaches for me are not independently graded. They're graded to the extent that they impact their team, right? So, like saying that Andy Reid is a great coach, like we should be more likely to bet on Kansas City is like, okay, but to the extent that he's a great coach, it's reflected in my grades, right? So I'm not adding any subjective element. There are coaches that do seem to consistently get more out of the team, right? In terms of results. Coaching tendencies matter, right? So like Andy Reid doesn't like to put his foot on the gas in the second half of the lead. Like we all know that. Whereas, McDermott and the Bills don't mind running with the score. So like understanding tendencies matters, but in terms of like this coach is better than this coach is worse than this coach, I don't try to assign individual credit. I try to evaluate the team holistically, and to the extent that that's coach versus player, I don't know. It doesn't matter. Like they're both impacting the game. So
yeah, and sometimes in the cases of Atlanta, Jacksonville, not to name names or anything, the GM matters.
yeah,
And if you're not giving your coach a full deck, that's a problem. And so I evaluate them in the entirety like you. Well, a coach can only go so far. He needs some sort of a roster to make
yeah.
this work.
I will say coaches can matter when you're doing futures, like more long-term bets rather than game by
Okay.
game, because I think that different coaches probably like sort of keep the bottom from falling out versus others. You know, like
Yeah.
I think that matters. That can matter when you're projecting futures, but like for individual games, it's like, yeah, like, you know, what have they done on the field? Who cares?
So one or two more topics is all I have. Do you watch preseason the way you watch regular season?
No, I'll tune in when the starters are playing just to get a sense,
Yeah.
especially for rookie quarterbacks and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's more just like I'm excited football's on. I'm not grading it. I'm not making team
Yeah.
projections, but I do like to kind of see how it goes. Like, I mean, I think if you watch like Washington Commanders this past preseason, like when Daniels was in there, they looked really good on offense. Like they moved the ball well. So there was a little bit of softening already in terms of my prediction that he would struggle. But it wasn't like I just didn't bet on or against them week one. It was kind of like, wait and see. But I do think you can kind of pay attention to what's going on in those games, how the players look. But you just can't overreact because it's not a full game plan. It's not a full defense. Yeah.
I mean, I used to love the 4 preseason game schedule. I know others didn't, but because week 3 was a dress rehearsal and you can get a lot out of week 3, but there is no week 3 now. There's week 0, 0, 1, and 0, 2. I mean, they don't do enough there, but I'm only looking for anomalies. If a team was really bad versus the run and all of a sudden they're like allowing 2 yards per carry, I'll take notice. If they're allowing 3.5 yards per carry, I won't take notice because it's so random, you know, in terms of that. But if there's a real big shock, I might look at that.
Yeah.
Futures market. You mentioned futures, and I know you've had some season win totals and so on, and divisional things. How do you go about doing that if you're not studying as much in the I mean, are you making a July bet even though you're not picking it up again until August, or are you waiting? You know, how do you attack this futures market?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit subjective and kind of like I don't have a futures model. I know some people actually model out, you know, outcomes, and I every year I'm like, I'm going to build myself a futures model so that I can build model-based futures plays, and then I never do because it's such a small percentage of the amount that I bet in a given year. Like my week-to-week volume is so much higher. So I just like to bet on that's more like opinions and stuff. Like I like division bets especially because a lot of times that's a way to play for one team and against another team. So like one of my biggest bets this past season was the Eagles to win their division because it was like plus 125 at the time. And like it was, I like found myself high on Philadelphia and low on Dallas, right? And at the time it looked like the Giants and Commanders were both going to be sort of non-factors. Turns out Washington put up more of a fight. But in terms of like, okay, if I think the Eagles have roughly twice as high a chance as the Cowboys, and the market is pricing them as roughly equal, like there's got to be value there, right? So it's sort of subjective and you know, based on how I view the teams and sort of what the perception was coming out of last year, more so than what the changes were and who they drafted.
Yeah, when I did my 32 team previews, and it was after the draft, you know, one by one last year, and I think we texted on this later in the year. I said there's such a marked difference between Dallas and Philadelphia. Dallas passive in the draft, Philadelphia proactive. Dallas first place schedule, Philadelphia not the first place schedule. You know, so on and so forth. The coaching here, the draft development, the 3 years, and so on, and it just became obvious to me. And I was like you, well, Washington and the Giants, Washington's going to be better, but they're not going to challenge. And the Giants are going nowhere because Pythagorean theorem told me that they were actually going down.
Yeah.
Washington put up quite a fight. I will admit that. But in the end, there was a difference between Dallas and Philly. So we got one right in terms of that. as we've gone through this and we've done this, and I think hopefully it's been a value for people who have been watching this and listening this in terms of how you approach everything. Do you have any other tips that you would give to people who want to start out by doing any sort of model? One model doesn't fit all. We do it different ways and stuff like that. Do you have any tips that you would give out there in terms of your last 3-5 year journey?
Yeah, first of all, I just saw that there was a chat. Russell Saylor said Bond. Yeah, Zach Bond is the linebacker I was trying to think of. Thank you. Yeah, my advice would be sort of, there's value in thinking independently. Like our brains have biases and, facts and reality that aligns with how we already view the world. They don't get filtered, but facts and reality that contradict something we already believe receive resistance. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the first are valid and the second are invalid. There's a groupthink that goes on that, this is the way to think about this game. This is the way to think about betting. This is the way, because that's all that anyone talks about. And that can create a sort of collective bias. And I think that there's value in just saying, I understand my process. I understand how I think about the game. I understand how I think about betting. Here's why it's valuable. Here's what I'm doing. It's well thought out. It's a robust process. Trust that, right? Trust the process. Trust your instincts. Trust the way that you do things, rather than just giving in because someone else must be smarter. Like that's not the case. Like the more I experience with the world, the more I realize that there's a lot of incompetence out there. Even among people who are successful. Successful people can be incompetent. So I think my advice would just be trust yourself, trust your process, do something independent, because when you're dealing with a market like betting, there is actual value in being independent and thinking differently. Because thinking the same way that the market thinks just means you're going to be aligned with the market and not find value. So that's kind of my advice, is like embrace it. And also like that's a life worth living, right? Like living a life where you are yourself and you're following your path in the face of whatever criticism is just a good path to live. So I think that's my general advice.
Yeah, I'd say add just a little to that. It's trial and error. It is in developing vaccines. It is in the business world. It is in the sports and the sports betting world. The first few years, you just have to mold where you need to be, and then you go from there. And if something happens that there's a stretch that's not working well, it's back to trust the process, because there are going to be peaks and valleys, and how a person internally deals with that is going to help determine whether they're going to be successful or not successful. Yeah. So 2025, where are we going to find you? Are we going to find you? What's your plan?
Yeah, I mean, more of the same, like continuing to build out my process further, bet quietly and hopefully well. So, I mean, I don't know. Twitter is becoming less interesting to me, to be honest. Like I still have an account, but I deleted it off my phone, so I don't get alerts anymore. So I'll go on there whenever I feel like it, but it just feels like such a wasteland of I don't know, just trash right now. So I use it during the season because that's where I get my injury alerts. But I mean, outside of that, the interactions are not interactions that I find life-giving. They're not with people that I find to be people that I care about. So you can still find me on Twitter, but I think, DM me if you want an actual conversation, because I think that's where the good conversations happen.
Well, I'm sure we're going to hook up at some point, or, we'll text or DM back and forth about this, that, or whatever as we get closer to the season. But I do appreciate you spending the time with me today. I really want this off-season football fireside chat to be not just about who do you like week one, or who do you like this, or what about this team. It's just more philosophical and process building. And so I thank you so much for doing this with me. Next week, I'll be back on Wednesday again, and we will get into a little bit of content next week, because free agency is officially happening in a couple of hours. I know it's been unofficial with a million things. So next couple of weeks, we'll skip a little bit of philosophy, although I'm going to put that in with the next couple of guests. We'll talk about the process and so on, but we'll talk a lot about teams and free agency. So thank you for listening today. Thanks again, Sharpe Clarke, for joining me with this episode, and I'll see you again, everybody, next week.